Okay, well, I think we'll get started then at this point. Um, Thank you everybody for joining this webinar. Really excited to be hosting this one today. This webinar is Network Discovery, Assurance, and Compliance Validation with Forward Networks and NetBox Labs. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Fabrizio and Manuel from Forward Networks. My name, first of all, is Rich Bibby. I'm a technical advocate here at NetBox Labs. Um, Fabrizio and Manuel, as I say, welcome to the call. Would you mind just saying hello and just introduce yourself quickly, if that's okay?
Sure, thanks, Rich. I'm Fabrizio Maccioni. I'm part of the product team in Forward Networks, and I lead the technical marketing engineer team, or TME. And one of the areas that I'm focused on is building a technical partnership and integration with the third-party software like NetBox Lab. And with me, we have Manuel, who's a part of the engineering team in the infrastructure team that helped me out building this integration. So thank you, Manuel, again. And not only in building the transformation between Forward and NetBox, as I'm going to explain later, but also on writing a proper Python code and building some automation to make sure that we always deliver with good code.
Fantastic. Thanks, Fabrizio. Okay, so what's the agenda for today? It's going to be split into two parts. I'm just going to start off talking a little bit about NetBox Labs. We're going to talk about what is a network source of truth and why we need one. I'll introduce NetBox for those that aren't familiar with NetBox. We'll have a brief overview of that. And we'll take a look at what we're seeing or what we've put together as a network automation reference architecture. And that will probably give you a better idea of where these two tools, NetBox and Forward Networks, actually fit together. So we'll discuss that a little bit. That will give you an overall picture of a reference architecture that we can work to. In the second part, I'm going to hand over to Fabrizio. Fabrizio is going to talk about Forward Networks to introduce Forward Networks to those that aren't familiar. Then we'll also look at, or he'll also look at how NetBox and Forward Networks work together as part of this modern network automation architecture that I'm going to talk about. We'll then move on to a demo of this integration between Forward Networks and NetBox. There are two elements to the integration. So the first element is actually onboarding a NetBox instance. So this will be an empty NetBox instance that you've probably all seen with no data in it when you first get started with NetBox. And the first use case really takes the data that has been learned by Forward Networks about the network and then ingests that or actually sends that to NetBox. So that's the first use case. And the second use case is actually then is the other way around, really. It's importing data from NetBox to enrich the data that's known about the network in Forward Enterprise. So this will be things like things that can't be learnt in a discovery process, of things like maybe racks and site information, and so on. So there'll be two parts to that demo, which should be really exciting. So for those of you that don't know NetBox Labs, we make it easy to build and manage complex networks. So we were founded in 2023 in New York. We are the commercial steward of the NetBox open source software project, which hopefully most of you are familiar with. We have a world-class team that first of all built and led NS1. Some of you might know NS1 as a managed DDI software business previously. So the founders of NS1 moved on to found NetBox Labs, along with the founder Jeremy Stretch, who founded the NetBox project. So those are some of the people that are involved with NetBox Labs, and we have some world-class investors. And now in the time that we've been going as a business, we've also got some world-class customers as well. So a little bit about NetBox Labs. This is a nice quote we came across a while ago from Alex Ankers, who's he's a consultant in network automation, but he was writing an opinion piece recently. Enterprises and organizations that leverage a network source of truth, that's NSOT, this year will gain a clearer, more comprehensive view of their network, generating more efficient and effective overall operations. Not to mention, many source of truth repositories are much more well-refined than their CMDB predecessors, and some, such as NetBox, are truly a joy to use. So a great quote there from Alex, but it really highlights this point that more and more people are adopting a network source of truth because it allows them to, first of all, adopt network automation and to scale that network automation. So we'll talk about where people are on that journey as well in a second towards network automation. What is a network source of truth? So very briefly, a network source of truth actually defines the intended state of your network and represents it as structured data. So this is a difference between the intended state as you're defining it in your source of truth versus the actual operational state that your tools such as Forward Networks are observing and gathering when they're discovering the data out there. So this is you as the network engineers or the architects who are saying, this is the intent of my network. This is how my network should be. So that's your intended state, and it's represented as structured data, which means that basically other systems can interact with NetBox and use that structured data in a programmatic way. And the Forward Networks integration is a classic example of that. Another system being able to talk to NetBox and interact with that structured data. It should act as a single consistent data set. Sometimes adopting a network source of truth can require a mental shift for network engineers away from the way networks used to be described, perhaps in things like documents and diagrams, because the network source of truth becomes that authoritative reference for the network. And the data that lives in your network source of truth drives your network automation. So you can't really do network automation at any sort of scale without reliable data to automate against. So if your inventory of devices or if your device configurations, aren't stored in a single consistent way that's easily accessible as structured data, then your network automation isn't going to work at all. So that's why a network source of truth is very important. Obviously, we're talking about inventory data, data center infrastructure, DSIM data, IPAM, and things like through to network properties and circuits as well. You can store all of this in your source of truth. We see lots of customers on various stages of this journey as they move from a documenter through to an automator on the right hand side. So when they're documenting on the left, this is where they're getting rid of those old sources, disparate sources of data, such as spreadsheets, text files, people that left the company a few months ago, all these kind of old legacy sources of documenting a network. So when they start using NetBox as a source of truth, they're getting rid of those legacy sources of data, and they're moving to either discovery, which we're going to see with Forward Networks in a minute, or manually capturing the additional network data and putting it into the source of truth. And changes to the network actually start with the documentation. So they start with it. You make a change into your source of truth rather than you make a change on the network first, which was the old way of doing things. People then step through the modeling phase, really, where they're actually starting to connect up this data in cohesive, using the cohesive data model that NetBox has, which allows you to link IPAM data and DSIM data together in a consistent manner across the different models. And then finally, on the right-hand side, once you've started to document, you're modeling the data consistently, you can then really start to automate against it. So implementing changes, for example, they start with changes to your network source of truth, which is the intent of your network. And then from there, you can move on to doing things like assurance, which is what we're going to touch on with Forward Networks here. So this is, identifying, is the network behaving in a way we think it should be? Are my policies for, my security policies for SNMP configurations across my devices that we define in our intended state, are they actually being enforced? And that's where you can really get to, advanced automation. NetBox is the world's most popular network source of truth. I would say that, but it genuinely is, I believe. It has a hugely comprehensive network data model. You can go from modeling ASNs, going alphabetically all the way through to VPNs and everything in between. API and integration first, which means that obviously it's got the REST API, GraphQL interface. We have things like event streams and webhooks, which are both ways now to get data back out of NetBox as well. So this is why Forward Networks were able to easily integrate their system with NetBox. It's got massive extensibility from plugins through to loading device type data, custom scripts, custom fields, you name it. It's infinitely customizable and extensible, and it has an enormous ecosystem. So lots of other systems work with NetBox seamlessly. So because of its API and interfaces, other tools such as Forward Networks can operate seamlessly and interact with NetBox. So it's that's why it is the very popular network source of truth. It's also powered by a massive open source community here. So these are just some of the numbers. I think we went over 15,000 GitHub stars recently in the last week or so. And some of these numbers, like the 11,000 plus software commits, it just shows you the pace of development that happens with the NetBox, with the NetBox project. So it's very actively developed, a huge community supporting it, lots of contributors and maintainers as well. So, a great open source software project. Now, some of you may or may not be aware, but recently there was a new addition to the range of NetBox offerings, and that's the one in the middle, which is NetBox Enterprise. I'll talk about that in a second. First of all, NetBox Open Source, which you might be familiar with, is the open source version of NetBox, which has a massive and active community and product and ecosystem. There's a catalog of certified plugins from the most popular community projects to go with that as well. Then we step up to NetBox Enterprise. So this would be, the use case would be if you have open source NetBox and you're running it on your own, you're running it on your own infrastructure, but you'd like some support with that. So you want 24/7 support. You want some enterprise grade features that you don't get with standard open source NetBox. You want to do upgrades with confidence and get best practice and training and being able to learn from the NetBox experts. So you get that support from NetBox Labs with NetBox Enterprise, but ultimately you're still running NetBox on your own infrastructure. And then on the right-hand side, we have NetBox Cloud, which has been around now for a little while. It has all the capabilities of open source and enterprise, and it's the software as a service edition of NetBox. So it's fully hosted on our own rock solid platform, secure and easy to use, scalable. Basically, when you're running NetBox Cloud, you're just consuming it obviously as a service. So your administrative overhead is basically reduced to zero with NetBox Cloud. Now, a couple of last slides before we move on to hand over to Fabrizio. This is the modern network automation reference architecture that I touched on at the beginning. So you can see if we start in the middle, actually, it's probably the easiest place to start. NetBox is right in there in the middle as the source of truth for your network. Now, the top left-hand corner, you can see the observability and assurance space in this architecture. And right there at the top, you can see the Forward Networks logo. So Forward Networks, their tool sits in that space. So it's observability and assurance. So it's discovering the network, and then it's also sort of acting on the data that it's discovered in the network. But if you look at the bottom left corner there with operations, so this is where there are changes made to the source of truth. So that could be through another system like ServiceNow, for example, that's interacting with NetBox, or it could be through network engineers who are actually making changes directly in NetBox. But what that ultimately means is that if once a change has been made in NetBox, then that would initiate, in this kind of architecture, it would initiate an automation run. So your automation tools on the bottom right there, so things like Ansible, Python, Nornir, they would extract the data that they need from NetBox. So they're saying, hey, I need to deploy a new VLAN to the data center. Please give me the details of the VLAN. Which devices am I deploying it to? And it would extract that from NetBox and then deploy that intended state out to the network. And then your observability tools, are observing what's out there on the network. So they're actually pulling back the actual state of the network. And then if we close the loop, you can compare with tools like Forward Networks, you can compare that observed state as opposed to the intended state that's in NetBox. And then if there's a delta or a difference between those two states, then you're able to act on it and do something about it. So that's this closed loop network automation stack that we like to talk about, because I think it explains the architecture pretty well, and you can see where tools like NetBox and Forward Networks fit together very nicely. We'll probably come back to this slide at the end, and you'll also get copies of all these slides at the end of the presentation as well. But you can get a free 14-day trial of NetBox Cloud. Just go to netboxlabs.com/trial. And here is the link as well to the GitHub repository for the Forward Networks integration for NetBox. So don't worry if you don't grab that or copy it. You'll get a copy of the slides after the presentation as well. So On that note, I will now hand over to Fabrizio. I'll stop sharing. And then Fabrizio, if
Thank
you'd
you,
like to
Rich.
take over.
Yep, thank you, Rich. So before I start with showing the integration in details, let me start with a brief introduction of Forward Networks. In this slide, you'll see what's our mission. So the mission of Forward Network is transforming networks to be reliable, agile, and secure. And we have spent the last 10 years to build a platform with this mindset, solving the problem of networks to be agile, reliable, and secure. But what's the problem that we are trying to solve? The problem is in the complexity of the network and the growing complexity. So over time, networks are becoming more and more complex, larger, due to the number of network devices, the vendors, platform, all the different application and all the different protocols that are in modern networks, right? And regardless of being for network security, for cloud security, or for even for network operations, all the different teams are they have challenges every single day, right? And since these complexities are growing over time, it's becoming almost impossible to be managed by humans. So there is a need for some software to help these operation engineers to manage this very complex infrastructure. And this is exactly what Forward did. Build a platform, a network digital twin of the network, so that a customer can manage in an easier way their infrastructure. Now, what's a network digital twin? The easiest way to explain what a digital twin is, it's by an analogy. So how many people today use paper maps in their car? Not many, right? Because now we use something like Google Maps that allows us to go from point A to point B and know exactly which are the direction. And now Google did it. They essentially collected all the information about the road. They index everything and they made available through Google Maps. So it's static data about the roads, all the roads in the world. And then on top of the static data, they are the dynamic data, like traffic, it could be police reports, it could be car crashes, and so forth. So static data and dynamic data in the same platform. And we have reused the same approach for the network. But instead of having roads, now we have network paths. So every single path in the network can be discovered and made available to Forward Networks. How do we build this digital twin? So we start by discovering every device in the network, so the switches, routers, load balancer, and firewall across many different vendors, of course. And what we do, we use we collect the configuration and state, the operational state of the device, so that we can reason about how a network device behaves. Meaning we can understand what's going on for every packet that comes in any port in any device. So whether the packet will be rewritten, will be dropped, will be forwarded to a given port, every single transformation for every single packet in a device. And then we uplift a notch. So instead of doing the analysis for a single device, we do it across the entire network, so that you can reason about any packet entering the network in any port and going anywhere in the network. So again, reason about any possible path in the network, instantly queryable. Okay? You can use this digital twin to understand, for instance, if your network is secure, if you have a critical connectivity for your business application, or for auditing purposes. And all the rich data that we collect from the network, from all the different vendors and operating systems, it's made available to customer via NQE. So what we did with we collect, we fully parse, we normalize all the data so that it's vendor agnostic, and then we make it available through a database and through an NQE interface, a network query engine interface via REST APIs or via UI. And I'm going to provide more information about NQE later, since all the integration that we built between Forward and NetBox, it's based on NQE or network query engine. So which are the main use case? Typically, Forward Networks is used by the security teams, cloud or multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, and networking teams. And there are some use cases that are common across all of them. So it could be like compliance and audit, or could be workflow automation, like in the case of this integration. And some other use case might be more specific depending on the team. So it could be vulnerability management for a network security team, could be end-to-end visibility for a cloud and multi-cloud, or troubleshooting and path verification for a network operation. So a lot of use cases, some of them across the entire team, all the teams, and some maybe a little more specific. Forward Network is not a tool, it's actually a platform, an enterprise-ready platform. It's deployed at scale in up to 50,000 devices nowadays, looking for bigger networks to manage now, and support all the common sign-on standards like SSO or LDAP. It's very secure. We encrypt all the data, and integrates broadly with most of the tools and the platform that our customers are using, including, of course, NetBox. We provided two different deployment options. You can rely on our SaaS offering, so it's fully managed by Forward, or you can deploy it in your premises, either in your data center or in your own cloud. And we say it's no risky because we collect information using a read-only credential. We don't change any configuration in the device, so we don't change the actual network. And we don't require any firmware updates. So we just read the configuration in state using read-only credentials. And then it's no pain because it doesn't require any agent, doesn't require then a full stack of racks. There is no window involved in the platform. There is no need for appliance, and we provide everything in the platform itself, so you don't even need to install or update any software apart from the platform. And so far, we have received a very wide and very good industry recognition from G2 or from Gartner peer reviews, and always growing number of awards in the cloud security and in the networking market. Okay. If you want to get started with Forward, there are different ways. You may want to start going to the forwardnetworks.com website, where you can get information about the platform itself and all the different features that are provided with the platform. Or you can read the review that I just mentioned, or you can try by yourself. There are different ways. The easiest would be playing with the Forward Quest, which is a gamification of the platform for different personas. Or you can reach out so that we can provide a deep dive demo for you. With that, let me go back to the network automation architecture that Rich explained earlier. And in this architecture, as Rich mentioned, we fit in the upper right and upper left in the observability and assurance part. So we'll observe the state from the network because we collect all the information like a configuration and state. And then we interact with the operations on the lower left, meaning that you can, based on the state of the network, you can create, for instance, a security incidents in ServiceNow, or you can interact with the NetBox, with the source of truth, as I'm going to explain in the different use case for the integration that we built. So let me start with the first use case. First use case will be you start from scratch, your NetBox is completely empty, and you want to onboard it for the very first time. So with this use case, you can rely on all the data that we already collected from the network, so the observed state, and onboard the NetBox with this data. The integration that we built, it's based on a Python script, right? So we didn't use any plugin, but we use a Python script so that will be easy also to be customized by the customer, but at the same time providing some flexibility in terms of what can be exported from Forward to NetBox. And I'm going to explain how. So let me start showing the NetBox instance. Okay. So as you can see, there is nothing here, no devices, no interfaces, no sites. And the Python script takes a little bit to fully populate the NetBox. So before I start going in details about the integration, let me start at the Python script itself. So as you can see, it's already started creating sites and adding manufacturers. So if I go back here, and I refresh, I do see that there are some device roles, types, manufacturer that already been populated in NetBox. But meanwhile, let me provide a little more detail on how we do it. So essentially what the Python script will do will import data from Forward using the network query engine APIs, more on this later. We'll transform the data from the schema in Forward to the schema in NetBox Cloud. And then, of course, we'll export to NetBox using the NetBox APIs. Okay? And in this demo, I started all the process manually for the sake of this demo. And of course, you can automate the entire process using webhooks from Forward, so that every time that we collect from the network, you can make sure that all the data is exported to NetBox Cloud, so that the NetBox Cloud has always fresh data and it's always up to date. The integration is a very easy tool to use. 3 simple steps. First one, you download the repo from GitHub. It's a public repo, so everybody has access to it. Second, you edit a configuration file, and I'm going to show you all the configuration that you need to provide. And the third one, you just run the script exactly as I just did. Okay, so super simple. Now, let me give you a little more information about the network query engine or NQE. As I mentioned at the very beginning, all the information that we collect and parse are stored in this database. Okay? And the database, it's reused in a schema, which is based on OpenConfig. So if you are familiar with the OpenConfig models for network devices, we use the same schema as a base, and we augmented for information that are not already in OpenConfig. And the data itself, it's collected to build the digital twin. But then we open up the platform and allow customer to use all this data for their own use case and for their own audit purposes, for whatever they want to do with the data itself. And we provide all this data through an interface. It could be either REST APIs or it could be in the UI. But the main idea is to provide a way to query the network like it was a database. Right? Everything is collected, everything is already pre-indexed, and you can easily query for any information in the network. What you see here, it's a screenshot of the UI and the IDE that you can use to work with the NQE. And I'm going to show you the NQE in the platform itself. But essentially what you can do here, you have a query editor where you build your queries. And the query that I'm showing here is one of the queries that we're going to use for the integration itself. It's the query used to import the devices from Forward to NetBox. And if you see at the very top, we are iterating through the different network devices. We are narrowing down only to devices that are successfully completed. We use some let statement just for readability. And then we provide a list of records in key value pairs in a JSON format for a name, device type, site, role, status, and so forth. So you define the information that you want to export, right? Then what you can do in the IDE, you can select a network, you can select a given snapshot and just execute it. So run this query so that you can see the results. So it's the results with the name, device type for every single device that we have found and we have successfully collected from the network. For this integration, you don't need to build any query because we already built all the queries for the NetBox integration, and we have already added this query to the Forward library, which is a collection of queries that can be used by all the customers, and it's shipped with every release of Forward Networks. Okay? So no need to build them unless you want to customize the integration itself. Queries in the for every integration usually are referred by IDs, right? So and the IDs can be found either through the GUI with the info icon or directly in the URL using the query ID filter on top. Okay, so this is the way in which when you build automation reusing NQEs, use the IDs instead of using the names. Now let me explain how we do the transformation between the forward data and the NetBox data. Okay. So on the right side, there is an example of an API for building, for adding a device. Okay. And you see the name, device type, and so forth. On the left side, you have the output of the NQE query for the given device. And as you can see, the keys in both the output from the forward query and the input from the REST APIs to create a device are exactly the same. But some data, it's not of the same type. For instance, the device type in forward is a string, CSR1KV in this case, while it's an ID in NetBox. So we need to find a way to convert the string from forward with an ID. And that's exactly what the Python script is in charge for. And it does it by querying for all the device type in a NetBox, making a lookup for the given device type, CSR1KV in this case, finding the ID, and replacing the string with the IDs. Okay? Same concept for location, routers, and so forth. So same concept will apply to any data that we want to export from forward and import to NetBox. And the Python script is exactly what it does. And at the bottom of the slide, you will see the APIs that we are using to gather the device type, sites, and role. Same approach applies for everything that we want to export, for sites, manufacturer, interfaces, or whatnot. So we'll query from forward with NQE, we transform using the lookups from a NetBox, and then we push the same information to NetBox. So I mentioned there are 3 simple steps, right? You'll clone the repo, you'll edit the configuration file, and then you can run the Python script. And the configuration file, it's already provided, an example of the configuration file is already provided in the repo. And there are only 2 sections that are required. The first one is the forward, where you need to provide the URL of the forward instance. It could be forward app in case of a SaaS deployment. Authentication in the form of basic authentication, base 64 encoding, and the network ID that you want to export. The other one is the NetBox authentication. So the URL of your instance and the token in order to authenticate it to the NetBox instance. Optionally, you can set the debug flag in case you are running into any issues, or you can define what to export. So this is the list of information that we export by default. Sites, manufacturers, device roles, device type, device and interfaces. And by default, we export everything. But customer can decide to not to export some of these data by setting the flags to false. Of course, since some of these data might be required in order to build to add the data, for instance, you do need to have a device role if you want to add a device. The device role needs to be in NetBox if you don't want to have a forward to create it. But the easiest way would be to leave it as it is and just let it forward to create all the information for you. The other optional part is the forward NQE queries. As I mentioned, we are using the IDs, and you can see here, these are all the IDs of all the queries that we are using for the demo. And you don't need to change those. You can just reuse those as they are. But in case you want to customize the integration by yourself, at this point, you can build your own script or customize the version of the script and changing the ID with your own NQE ID, of course. And that's it. That's all you need to do in the configuration YAML file. So now let's go back to the instance, to the NetBox. Let me refresh. And now you see we have 114 devices. We have 1,000 interfaces, 5 device roles, and so forth. So if I go on the devices, for instance, you see that for every device, I have the status, what's the site, the role, manufacturer, type, and a comment that allows you to say that it's either added or updated by Forward Networks. Or if we go back to the interfaces, or if you get interfaces for any device, You'll see the status, the name, of course, type, MTU, and so forth. So everything is published by Forward just by running the Python script.
Fabrizio, just to
Yep.
just to be clear there, so you started with a completely empty NetBox, right? So there was nothing existed, no sites, no manufacturers, device types, anything. It was completely blank. So the integration has done all of that. Yeah.
Yep. Completely empty. So this is the way in which you can start onboarding from scratch a NetBox device. That was the idea since the beginning. Correct.
Yep.
So if we'll double check, it took 7 minutes and 30 seconds to create 114 devices and 1,000 interfaces. So now let me move to the second use case. The second use case, it's on the other direction. So we built a bidirectional integration with NetBox Cloud. And in this case, what we'll do, we are importing data from NetBox. Because there is some data, as you mentioned, Rich, like recs, could be contacts, could be tenants that are not collected from the networks, but the customer need to provide and needed to configure in NetBox, right? So you onboard everything by yourself or using Forward, and then you add all this data to NetBox that later can be used to be imported in Forward for different use case that I'm going to show in a second. And we do it by using a feature in Forward Networks of importing data from external sources, of custom sources. So what we do, we can collect through CLIs, we can collect from SNMP, or we can collect from HTTP endpoints. And we'll import, we parse this data, we try to infer the schema to make it easier to reuse the data itself, whether it's an ID, whether it's a string, it's a list. So it's a way to infer the data to make it easier to use it. And then all this data is stored in the same NQE where we store all the data from the network devices and from the network in general. And once it's in NQE, you can use the same data for NQE queries, for decorators, NQE verification, like I'm going to explain in a second for this second use case. So it's importing data from a NetBox and reusing it in Forward. I'm going to show you two main use cases. The first one is to overlay information about the devices in the search application, in the device card. And the second one is how can reuse it to build NQE queries and for NQE verification, maybe for auditing reasons. So I'll start with the first one. So let me go in the Forward application. And this is the demo network that we are using for this integration. It's essentially a network where we have two different data centers, one in San Jose and one in Atlanta, and a bunch of cloud location for different public cloud providers, AWS, Azure, and GCP, because we collect both from on-prem and cloud. And if I go in the NQE library, which again, it's a collection of NQE queries that are provided by Forward, there is already a query that we can use for network devices from NetBox. And what it does, let me show you very quickly. They essentially extracted all the NetBox devices from the external source. So from the HTTP endpoint that we've used to import all the data from NetBox. And for every device is extracting information about name, manufacturer, role, site, rec, position, and so forth. So extracting data in the AQE. And if I execute against the demo network, I'll see that for every device, let me highlight for one of them. We have the manufacturer, EOS, we have the role, rec, location, and so forth. So this is the data that it's imported from NetBox, and using NQE, I'm extracting from the NQE itself. Now that I have the query, what I can do, I can use another feature of Forward called a decorator, where essentially I can overlay information on top of existing application. And I can do it for devices, I can do it for interfaces, and I can do it for path analysis as well. So in this case, I already created the decorator. I'm gonna enable it. And if I go on the search application that allows me to query for any information, and I look for the same device as before, now we have two different decorators. And the second one is the decorator about NetBox. So I see information like, again, same as before. The tenant, location, rack, position, which are not collected from the network, cannot be collected directly from the network, but imported from NetBox. The second use case is for how you can use data from NetBox for audited reason. And I'm gonna do using another NQL query. So it's a query about security, and that allows me to verify whether there are CV vulnerabilities in a given network device, because the Forward also provide vulnerability analysis for network devices. So in this query, if I run it for the entire network, I'll see there are 128 devices. And if I filter for which are violating the intent, which the intent is not having vulnerabilities in the network devices, I'll see that 114 are actually having vulnerability in the network devices. Okay? But what if I want to narrow down the number of devices only for those devices that are managed by a given team? Maybe for auditing reason, I want to know only which are the devices that are managed by, I don't know, the network access team. Right? So in this case, what I can do, I can duplicate this query, and then I can use, again, the data that I've imported from NetBox in order to build a query that allows me to check only for devices with the vulnerabilities managed by the network access team, for instance. So in the interest of time, I already built the query, and I'm gonna show you the difference between the initial query and the one that I built. So what I did, I just added, let me highlight it. I added this statement so that I query through all the devices that I've imported from NetBox. And then I check whether the tenant is configured for the given device, and the tenant, it's network access. This is how I've defined that these devices are managed by the network access team. And then I look through the network devices in Forward, and I look for devices that have the same name as in NetBox. Okay? So at this point, if I run the same query or the modified version of the query, I should find only those ones managed by the network access team. Here we go. So in this case, we have only 12 of those, right? Including the one that we were looking at before. And in this case, it says that there are 16 civil vulnerabilities, 4 of which are critical, 4 high, and 5 medium. So in this case, we are violating the intent because all 16 devices have CV vulnerabilities. And now that I have the query, what I can do, I can also save the query and use it in the network verification component of Forward. So Rich, you mentioned the network assurance component. This is exactly how you build the network assurance. You define intent. In this case, the intent was all the devices don't have to need, all the devices shouldn't have any vulnerability in them. So when I save it, I can check whether the intent is succeeding or failing. And since I haven't fixed the vulnerabilities yet, in this case, it's failing, and it's providing me the list of devices that are failing, and again, all the count for critical, high, and medium, and I can export this report so that it can be shared maybe with the auditors or with the internal security teams. Okay. So again, the idea is reusing this data from NetBox for augmenting the feature already provided by Forward. To learn more about the integration, again, you can go on the GitHub repo, where let me show you, not only we provided the Python script, but we also providing the README file more information about the integration, the better together story in a way, and how it works, and also information on how we are mapping the data from Forward to NetBox. Sometimes the names are different, not only the schema itself, which are the prerequisites, how you can run it, and also how you can customize it. Or you can go in the Forward community where you can share your use case. You can share if you've done any customization to the Python script that you can share with the community, or you can ask for support. And with that, I don't know if there is any open question from the audience. I didn't check the chat.
Yes, we have. That was great. Thank you, Fabrizio. Fantastic presentation. Really, really powerful stuff there to be able to, as you say, check for compliance and deviations against what we're checking for. So, augmenting that data with data from NetBox and vice versa. So yeah, fantastic stuff. Thank you for that. There's just one question in the Q&A at the minute. We may get some others coming in now, but the first question is from Ryan, and he says, how do you submit requests to have new network platforms added to Forward Networks? They are a customer, and however, they have several types of network devices that are not supported by the application.
Yeah, it's we have a customer success team, and we have a sales team that works very closely with the customers. So every time that there is a use case for a platform that we don't support yet, we work with the customer to build it. So we have a direct discussion with the customer itself. But we already provide a long list of platform, but of course there is always something that it's missing. But we build it only when there is a request from the customers. We don't build in the hope that it will be used by customers.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So really, it's just raise a support ticket with yourselves.
Yep.
And it can move that forward. Okay, fantastic. We don't have any other questions that are in there. Does anybody have any other questions right now that you feel that you'd like to ask? Please either ask them in the chat, or I think you might be able to raise your hand, or we can unmute you. Please do. I think you did an incredible job there, Fabrizio, explaining the solution and the integration. Yep, we're getting lots of comments just saying, yep, great stuff, nice session, and so on. So yeah, I think you did an amazing job there, Fabrizio. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard, for all the support in building this integration, because we do believe that it's a better together story, since we are a complementary platform, and having customer using both of them to create this network framework architecture, it's very helpful for a lot of customers. So
yeah, absolutely.
More and more customers will leverage it.
As you say, it's a great better together story. Great example of not only how extensible NetBox is and how it can be and how it can easily integrate with other tools, but also a great demonstration there of what people can do with the Forward Network solution. So really great to see that. So yeah, I think we don't have any other questions at all. So I'll just thank everybody. Oh, maybe we do have a question. Bear with me a second. Maybe we do. Yes, Vladimir, you have a question. You just need to unmute. I think you should be able to talk now. Vladimir, can you unmute yourself? Maybe not.
Maybe not. Yeah, I tried with it myself, and I cannot do it.
Yeah. Apologies, Vladimir. I don't know if you can type your question into the Q&A or just into the chat, but we certainly can't hear you. Okay, no worries. Vladimir, if you do want to email your question through to us, that's absolutely fine. You can do it afterwards, and we'll obviously get back to you on that. But if we don't have any others, we'll wrap it up there. So just thank you very much again to Fabrizio for that amazing presentation, and thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you, Rich, and thanks everybody. And thanks, Manuel, for all your help.
Yep, thanks, Manuel.
Bye.
Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.